Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. And today I have a very special guest. He is on for the second time, Jeffrey Sue. Like I said, we have the Jeff connection going on. If you aren't familiar with him, he is a health coach and founder / owner of First Call Out Fitness. He is also a co-host of the podcast, The Excellence Cartel. And I know that, he does stuff with the Physique Education Collective. I know you guys have something coming up here in the next couple months. And I always love those seminars. We were able to connect in person last time. So yeah, man, welcome back on. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. I guess you didn't you liked me enough to have me back on, so that's a good thing.
Yeah. Always get that. It's like the second date, right? It's like, did the first date go well? Maybe not. It's always if you have that second date or not.
Exactly. So here we are. But yeah, so like you said, we have PEC Tampa, Physique Education Collective, coming up the last weekend of January in Tampa, the 27th. We've got a great lineup. I think Alan Aragon, for those of you who may have heard of Alan, he will be speaking alongside, myself, Jason, Theobald, Jeff Black, Austin Stout, and a host of other great coaches. So we hope to see you there.
Yeah, I was really looking for the last one was really good. You guys had a lot of good speakers, and then this one I'm really excited for. You guys, again, like you said, Alan Aragon's going to be there, which he's obviously fantastic. I've never seen him speak in person, so I'm really going to try to make it out to that one, especially going to. And I'm sure I know you're from Boston. It's going to be cold during that time of year, so it'll be nice to get out to Tampa.
It will be, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So appreciate you coming back on. Like I said, I've been following your stuff a lot more closely and really love the content you put out. You put out a lot of like great classes as well too, which I think are really helpful for, a lot of people. I like the kind of more in-depth knowledge on things there with it. So looking forward to chatting with you today. So just to, it's been a couple months since we had chatted. I think it was sometime in May, maybe late May, we chatted last. Any update on like your training, nutrition, or anything like that?
Geez. Well, I forget the last time I was on. May have been, was it this year or was it last year?
It was May, around May.
Okay. So around then, I think I was just recovering from my surgeries. I had, a couple surgeries this year. I had my appendix removed. I had a lateral sphincterectomy. And I also got COVID. So around April, I think I was like 180 something pounds, the lowest I'd been in a while. And all these health issues forced me to come off of all the stuff that I was on and just completely like reset everything. And it's taken me an entire year so far to build back, 22 or so pounds. But now I'm healthy as can be. My labs look great. I'm thankful for going through all of that. And I linked up with Jose Raymond, of course. I think it was end of last year, and I'm still with him now. We train together, and that's made a world of difference to have someone there with you. And as an online coach, I will admit that that's something that us online coaches just can't do.
It is. It definitely is. That's the biggest challenge, is you don't get that hands-on, like direct feedback with everything. It take like you can get form videos, but the execution part of
it's not the same.
Right. The execution part, I think, is just super important there. So for you, you had to take some time off. You said it took you a little while to, get back to the weight that you were at. Are you finding that, I guess, they kind of talk about in research that like muscle, comes back fairly quickly. Have you found that to be the case, or do you think it's been a little bit more challenging than what you thought it would be?
No, I definitely find that that's the case. I think, the CNS, muscle memory, all these physiological processes, like they do come back online fairly quickly once you're pounding food again. And, of course, training properly. So.
Yeah, because, luckily I haven't had anything that's kept me out long term. And so, but I've seen it from clients and stuff like that, people that have trained in the past. It's like if they come back to you, like I love training those clients because it's like, hey, I know you're going to see results like super quick, just getting back into it and everything. What were some things that were, I guess, for you, having to deal with all those things during that period of time? What were some big takeaways from you that, maybe you didn't realize or didn't have? Yeah, again, you just didn't have the knowledge on it, like going into it, but actually experiencing that.
I guess I think the main takeaway is that I'm a bodybuilder at heart. I always like, say like, oh, I'm gonna just focus on my business, or I'm happier now when I'm not competing or whatever. But when I'm at those shows with my clients, man, like I want to be on stage. Like I'm like there with them, like every step of the way. And that part of me, I don't think is ever gonna die. And I just think that like while there is a lot of negative, stigmas to bodybuilding, and but there's also a lot of positives too, right? Like no matter how old I am or how the business grows, I'll always be a bodybuilder. I'll always eat like one, train like one. If I can get away with taking, some performance enhancers, God willing, I will. That ain't gonna change.
Well, no, absolutely. And I think with that, again, that gets a bad stigma right away, but it's like, again, I mean, you're a smart guy. I'm sure you've weighed the pros and cons of it, and you're not, and I think, again, just with anything, it's like all about how you go about doing it as well, too. That's going to be the big thing there with that.
Yeah. I mean, I've been on, 125 to 150 megs of test sip all year. My total testosterone levels are in the 700s. And I'm 38 years old. Everything else is great. And I've been able to gain muscle, gain strength, and look great this entire year on just that much of test. So, it goes to show that a lot can be done when you focus a lot more on what you should be. And I wasn't, because I was so busy with work and I was distracted. So I really just like dialed in on my nutrition like everyone should. And look at that. I got results.
Crazy how that happens.
Yeah, insane.
For you, so you kind of mentioned labs too. You said those are better now. I guess two questions on that. What were you noticing that when you had that time away and with all the stuff going on, did you notice anything specific kind of get out of whack there for yourself? And two, how often do you take labs for yourself?
Well, my cortisol was in the 20s. My fasted serum cortisol, to be specific, was like a 22 or a 25 at one point. My lipids were all out of control.
So real quick, with that cortisol, is that low? Is that considered low or high for that?
A serum fasted cortisol in the 20s is considered high.
High.
Because, if you were to test saliva, it's unbound. So there's no cortisol binding globulin in saliva. So likely it would probably be like maybe closer to 30 versus the serum, which is bound.
Yeah. Got you. Sorry, I just wanted to I just didn't know for sure if that was high or low there on that. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely high in early adrenal insufficiency, getting that, wired and tired feeling. My cholesterol was high too, because my stress was high. My testosterone levels were like in the 2000s. Free was like 1500. My estradiol E2, that was high. What else? Thyroid was great. My thyroid's always good. But those things. Oh yeah, my insulin was awful too. I think my insulin went up to a 19 at one point.
And
so that was not.
And that was all, you think, stress related from like kind of the injuries you had to go through the recovery process, or just maybe your lifestyle got a little out of whack during that time? Or
always a lifestyle factor. I work very, very hard with my business. I don't have an off switch, and that contributed to everything else. I think it was just like one thing after another.
Yeah. I'm sure not being able to train like you normally could have also potentially played a role in some of that, or do you think that actually would have made it better?
No, that made it better. So because I wasn't able to train, my cortisol came down. I slowed down with the business a little bit because I had to recover and everything. I pulled way back on my food. So that, of course, helped with insulin sensitivity. I lost a lot of body fat. And then once I started eating and training again, I just got leaner and bigger at the same time. You know how that goes when you take time off.
Yep. Yeah, the little body recomposition there.
Yeah.
So for you, how often do you take labs? Again, I would imagine too, with you being on performance enhancing, that might be a consideration for doing it a bit more potentially. I don't know for sure. I don't know how all that works out, but I would imagine that would be a reason to want to do it more often. But I'm curious to hear how often you do it, and maybe recommend for clients.
Absolutely.
And whatnot.
Yeah. So I'm fortunate enough to have a friend of mine who I went to high school with, who's a doctor down in Florida. So he will write me whatever I want in terms of scripts. He'll mail them to me and I bring them to the lab. So I get labs, every, 2 months, 3 months if I want. But not everybody has a friend who's a doctor who's willing to do that. Right. So I would recommend at a bare minimum, get at least once a year. If you can afford twice a year, great. But every quarter would be ideal if you can afford to drop that $200 to $300 on a comprehensive panel. All right.
And on top of that too, I would imagine that like, pay attention to like what phase of like nutrition or like training you're in as well too, because that's going to alter that.
Yeah. I mean, of course, paying attention to nutritional and training periodization can help, but there are a lot of biomarkers too that a lot of us can track at home. Now, a lot of people have a Whoop or an Oura ring. You can take your blood pressure, you can take your fasted blood glucose, you can, do some cycle syncing and track your period. So there's a lot of things that you can, be self-aware without having to have that full workup.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I think like you said, 1 to 2 times a year, but ideally, if you can afford it, quarterly is going to be your best bet there. Cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah, really appreciate you sharing that. So let's dive into the topic. I have a couple topics here that I want to chat with you about today. The first one being weight loss resistance. So maybe if we could chat, I think this is going to be helpful for a lot of people because I think there are a lot of people that, probably are in this position where they, again, they're staying on top of everything and they're just finding that, maybe they just can't get weight to move down. So I think it'll be cool to kind of dive into this a little bit there. So if you could maybe just kind of briefly go over like what it is, and then we'll just roll from there.
Yeah. So my perspectives on weight loss resistance might be different than some other coaches or programs or classes out there, right? My perspective is that weight loss resistance is purely a misunderstanding of how the bodily systems are functioning and how they intertwine with each other. So people keep focusing on, let's say, this side of things, on the right side of things, as an example, and they keep pounding that with supplements, with lab work, trying to get things to move, and it's resistant, right? Because they're not paying attention to stuff around that side, because everything's connected. So when you're trying to lose weight, you're doing tons of cardio, you're not eating a lot, and the fat's just not coming off. And you're like, oh, my body's resistant to weight loss. Or maybe you've heard about feeding up, so you switch coaches and you find a coach who's all about boosting your metabolism. We're going to feed you up and we're going to add calories, blah, blah, blah. And you feed up and all you do is you get fat and bloated. And you're like, where's this feed up and lean down at the same time shit that I see on Instagram all the time? It ain't working for me. My body's resistant. My body's stubborn to fat loss. And it's because they haven't paid attention to things like insulin sensitivity or digestion, or really pulling down on lifestyle stress and getting sleep hygiene down as well. So those are the real reasons why weight loss resistance is occurring. And it's because both clients and coaches aren't viewing a client case or the human body as a network of systems that have layers and require certain strategies to be layered in at certain times. And so people just going in with a direct approach, one approach only, and that's why they're meeting resistance.
It kind of sounds like an example here that I can think of is like somebody that like just overly thinks about like calories and macros, and like they just keep like pushing that, and they think that's kind of the thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's a tool that's going to get you there, but again, it's probably deeper than that, than just your calories and macros, right? Like you said, that's only one thing. Absolutely. Or even like you said, cardio, somebody that just hammers away at the cardio as well too.
Absolutely. So do you want me to talk about how I would approach a case like that, or?
Well, I was just gonna, obviously we'll kind of keep chatting about, again, more so I wanted to kind of get an understanding of like, what it is, where, and you did a great job there with that. So what we can do from here is, I guess, let's start out with like, what is going on in most cases here with this, right? Like, what would you say is like, again, I know this is probably going to be dependent and there's probably going to be multiple things here. And you kind of hit on what some of those things are, with insulin sensitivity, or insulin resistance, stuff like that. So what would you say, like, what's probably the most common thing that you see here with this?
The most common things I see is stress, perceived stress or real stress, and inflammation. Those would be the main two things I see. And then insulin resistance follows that. And then poor gut health follows that. And then poor estrogen metabolism for both male and females follows that.
So perceived stress and I think you said perceived stress. So I think again, when people hear that, their only thought is like, oh, hey, I had a bad day at work, right? So if you
Yes.
maybe want to hit on that, is there other things that you'll look for here with the stress aspect of it too?
Yeah, I mean, perceived stress can be, scrolling through Instagram and feeling like your life sucks while you're sitting in traffic going to your 9 to 5. It could be, worrying about Donald Trump being reelected or running again for president if you're on the opposite side of the political fence. It could be, friends and family who every time you're on a diet, they're like, oh, you should come out. You should come out. Why are you staying in? Why do you have to follow your meal plan? That's silly, blah, blah, blah. It could be an unsupportive wife or husband at home that makes it so much more difficult to go to the gym and to take your progress photos and to communicate with your coach. These are the little things that are insidious and are holding people back without them knowing it. It's not just, oh, I got into a car accident, or, oh, I'm getting a divorce, or I got fired from my job today. Yes, that's stress, but those are the elephants in the room that are in plain sight. I'm talking about the stuff that's hidden that people don't realize, but they're being eaten away at over time.
Yeah, kind of that, like you said, that kind of hidden, we're just kind of always in this, like, I feel like with the availability of just being able to access anything, it's like you can just always kind of be in that sympathetic state all the time if you're not careful of it. And I guess it's just one of those things too, where, again, if you're a little bit stressed and like, say something happens and then every little thing after that, it just kind of compounds and gets worse as well too. Is that kind of something that you'll see with that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say women will tend to do that, let things sort of stack on each other, stress stacking. And before you know it, they're blowing up. They've overflown their stress bucket. Versus, men, tend to escape, and you'll have men, turn to drugs and alcohol or sex or gambling, whatever. They won't check in with you. They'll tell you everything's fine and just hold it in, because we're all trained to do that. Just, hold it in, be cool. So yeah, you see that in clients a lot.
So I guess here, what are some things like with this where, so again, we're on the topic of weight loss resistance. And so somebody hears perceived stress. So again, it's like you could be crushing your calories and macros, right? But it's like, if you have all this perceived stress going on, this could be something that if you're not seeing the weight loss, like this might be a big thing that's going on with you. So like, what are some, like, I guess, is it a direct type of thing, or is it more like an indirect thing that would kind of cause this weight loss resistance?
It's a mixture of both, so it's direct habits. You could break down the direct things that they are actually doing that is negatively impacting their progress, and then there are the indirect things that they're not privy to, like the small little stressors that happen that they don't notice on a day-to-day basis. But either way, the first step is to be cognizant of stress, to identify it in order to compartmentalize it and then attack it or remove it. And then, of course, there's the physical side, which we can get into as well.
Yeah, let's kind of talk about the physical side there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so with a lot of my clients who, experience quote unquote weight loss resistance, I will have them rest. And when I say rest, I mean like a month off from lifting, and 2 weeks off from all sorts of cardio. So they're literally sitting on their ass, just going to work and just going about their day for the first 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, I'll allow a little bit of outdoor walking. I prefer outdoor walking, connecting to nature, being outside, getting the sun in your eyes first thing in the morning, fasted, because it can reset the circadian rhythm. And circadian rhythm is tied to insulin secretion, right? It's tied to thyroid. It's tied to your digestion. It's like the clock, right? So, I do that, but, we have to consider, individuals who have been addicted to exercise, where telling someone to, hey, just stop doing cardio after you've been working out 7 days a week for the last 5 years is like removing alcohol from an alcoholic. And they're going to go through withdrawal, which can be even more stressful than what you intended to pull them down from, right? So in those cases, I'll do a taper, and it all depends on how severely they are addicted to exercise.
Yeah, like you said, again, I think this is where like some information can get conflicted of like, oh, hey, you just have to exercise more, right? And it's like in that certain situation for that person that already has a ton of stress going on, and then their stress reliever is more stressed by working out or whatnot. Like for them, that's going to be somebody that you want to kind of taper down a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's important for both clients and coaches to realize that there are a variety of tools that we can employ to troubleshoot these types of cases, but it all depends on the timeline, the timing, the situation, the severity, the preference of the client. There's so much to it. So there is no right or wrong unless you apply something in the wrong context, and then it's wrong.
So. I think the big takeaway here with this one is like, if you are somebody that is experiencing that weight loss resistance and you're already like training a ton, it's like, okay, probably throwing more on top of that isn't going to be your best bet. Like, I guess on the flip side of that, if this is somebody that is like overweight, maybe they don't move as much as they should, is that somebody that you'll still like, this is probably where your methods are going to change a little bit in terms of how you go about that client.
Exactly. Like if I have a woman who's 230 pounds at like 5'4", and she's barely moving, I'm gonna work it into her daily habits where she's getting steps in, she's being less efficient, parking further away from the grocery store, taking stairs, stuff like that to get her moving, and that's going to relieve inflammation. So it all depends on the situation.
Yeah, because like it, and to go back to, this is where I was kind of just saying, like there's so much I feel like that goes into stress, and it's like the stressor for the person, that first avatar you kind of talked about, the stressor for them is they're doing a ton of extra stuff, they need to kind of cool off a little bit, whereas like the stressor for the overweight person that's more sedentary, their stressor is they just are freaking not moving, and they have that extra. So I guess on this also I had a question here on this that I wanted to dive into. Hopefully it comes back to me. If not, I guess I'll kind of circle back to that. Is there anything else on like perceived stress that you maybe wanted to hit on there with that?
I think we covered it. I think people just need to like take an inventory of the stuff, the mindless things that they do and say that can be affecting them subconsciously. The stuff that people say definitely matters. When a lot of people say like, oh, I'll never be this, or I'm not this, or I'm just this. When you bring yourself down like that, like your whole body like feels that. Like when you like, there's like, a lot of studies that have been done, like when you like posture a certain way, or when you hold your head up high when you walk, when you say, good things about yourself, your entire body, like, I don't want to get too like woo-woo, but like it's almost like every cell in your body is like more positive, versus you're like, oh, I'm just stupid, or I can't do this, or I'm just this, it's like what is that Igor, that donkey from Winnie the Pooh back in the day.
One thing I didn't one thing I didn't think we would talk about today, Winnie the Pooh. But no, I agree with you. I completely understand what you're trying to say there. It's like, yeah, I mean, even if it doesn't really feel like it's a big thing, and it's just like you're just kind of saying that as like a just not really, like, you have to really be careful with how you talk to yourself. I think that is really, like you said, it is like people think of it as woo-woo, but it's not really woo-woo. It's just like, hey, this is a small thing that you can do that really adds up.
Mindset, mindset training.
You subconsciously, I feel like, start to believe that whether you don't realize it or not.
Yeah.
This is what I wanted to talk about. It came back to me as you started talking. So with this perceived stress too, I think in some situations, is this something that you see? And I think this goes back to kind of the indirect thing where for some people, stress can kind of be something that kind of starts to uptake like hunger response and like potential overeating, and maybe even like craving more calorie dense type foods as well too, right?
Yeah, well, in our world, we have a lot of, stressors that aren't, the traditional physical stressors of, the caveman days. So, there's a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and Robert Sapolsky, he talks about the stress response and how the ACTH or ACH, these hormones that, epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, these come first when you are perceiving a stressor, and then the glucocorticoids like cortisol and everything kind of comes after that. And so the initial stress response hormones clear out faster versus cortisol and other glucocorticoids, they clear out slower. So what happens is when you constantly are flipping this switch up and down throughout the day, like you're in traffic, then you have a project at work, then you're fighting with your wife on the phone at lunch or whatever, right? So you're constantly having lots of stress and then a slow clearance of the remaining stress hormones, okay, to keep things simple here. So what happens is that you get these hunger cues, because after a stress response, the body wants to replenish, release glucose, right, via glucagon that was released to prime yourself to escape the stressor. And so hunger signaling is kicked up, leptin and ghrelin levels change, you get hungrier, more ghrelin signaling, and you stress eat. That's why we stress eat when we are facing non-physical stressors. You got a project at work, you're going to stress eat. It's the same thing as if you got into a car accident.
And I feel like too, there's probably this kind of like learning aspect from a brain standpoint too, where it's like in those situations, your brain starts to like, if depending on what your food choice is, might kick off like dopamine. And then like when you're in that situation, that's how your body kind of copes with that. And I think that's where you can get yourself into this endless cycle there with that as well too.
Definitely.
Cool. So yeah, I think we hammered out perceived stress pretty well. So again, that's one big thing that you'll see there. And I'm sure, again, this ties into probably a lot of these as well too. So I know the next one you mentioned was inflammation. So I don't know if there's anything specific on inflammation that you want to go over, or how it's going to differ from like what we just talked about there.
Well, when you have inflammation, well, let's just talk about what inflammation really is, right? So the easy way to explain inflammation is like, think of, all the cells in your body like locks, and hormones are like keys. And so the key has to go into the lock in order for a response, like a door to open, right? So inflammation is like rust or a piece of bubble gum that's been jammed on that lock, so the key can no longer do its job. Now, the complex scientific explanation is that there are a lot of different hormones or signaling, or signals rather, in your body, mainly something called CRP. There's another one called TNF alpha. There's another one called JNK and IKK. And these are basically cytokines that are released throughout your body in response to stressors, whether it's physical or emotional or mental. And so these cytokines exert a response on the hypothalamus. And so the hypothalamus is the center of control for things like luteinizing hormone, things like follicular stimulating hormone, which is why when you are stressed, you're probably not thinking about sex. When women are stressed out, they're not going to want to have sex with you. So that's a stress response, and that's inflammation. Inflammation begins in the brain, not just like in the fat cells or in the gut or whatever. It starts in the hypothalamus. And then it obviously, changes how your body uses fuel and produces hormones.
So again, it's going to be this kind of indirect thing where, like you said, it's going to change how your body, how the hormones work, and again, utilizes the fuel that you give it as well too in this situation.
Exactly. Yeah, like more storage versus more fat, more lipolysis, fat burning, glucose usage. It just tips the scales in favor of metabolic compensation, weight loss resistance, insulin resistance, things like that.
And you'll see like potentially like a downregulation, and because of all the hormones that are going on, you could see like a downregulation in like your total daily energy expenditure, things like that as well too, potentially.
Downregulation in thyroid, conserve resources. Very simply put, the body is under attack. It's under stress. We don't want to reproduce. We want to shut down sex hormones, sex drive. We're not bringing a baby into a stressful environment. We're going to slow down digestion, conserve fuel. That's essentially what's going on.
And again, it's like I hear all these things, and it's like this is going to kind of carry over to some of the other stuff that you mentioned, like happens in weight loss resistance. So it's like they all kind of tie together, right? It's probably not just one thing. They're all going to tie together here at this point. So I guess what are kind of the big things that you see in terms of things that cause like inflammation for people that are having this kind of weight loss resistance? I don't know if there's anything that you commonly see there. Again, we said perceived stress can be one of them already, but I don't know if there's anything else on top of it that you might see here.
We talked about perceived stress. We talked about over exercising and under exercising. Obviously, food choices too. can play a big role. So a lot of people aren't aware that they may have a gluten sensitivity, not an intolerance, but like just a slight sensitivity that could trigger a little bit of low-grade inflammation. Obviously, the types of carbs that you ingest, if they're processed, obviously, maybe we can talk about that when we get into the GLP-1 RAs. But obviously, if you're eating a lot of processed foods, you're going to be more inflamed, poor digestion. So intake, excessive output, inadequate output, perceived mental stress, emotional stress, and physical stress, I would say, if you've gone through a lot of surgeries or any sort of physical abuse, that could play a role too.
What are your kind of go-tos here on, kind of lowering inflammation? Again, is it I'm assuming it's probably very similar to how to just lower perceived stress and stress overall, but I don't know if there's anything here that you would do.
Well, dietary wise, you mean?
Yeah, dietary. I think that's a good route to go with it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, some of the coaches out there, you may have heard of like, Jason Theobald's, flush, feed, function, rest, like something like that. There's like a 4F or 3F, something like that. Isabella Wentz in her Hashimoto's protocol, she also talks about flushing. Dr. Walter Longo, who wrote I think the longevity fasting mimicking diet, he talks a lot about fasting and flushing as well. So there's a lot of validity to an approach or a subject when multiple people who are pretty well versed in this realm are talking about the same approach. And so flushing has a lot of validity and a lot of application to weight loss resistance, in the sense that you are easing digestion, you're using mainly fruits and fruit juices and protein replacement or meal replacements to get things moving from your mouth through your butt into the toilet as fast as possible. So that's going to alleviate a lot of GI issues. You're going to be lowering inflammation just by doing that. And it's also pulling back on food intake, offering more micronutrients via fruits and vegetables, and increasing fiber and lowering protein, which is really hard to digest when you have low stomach acid or if you're stressed. So that's like kind of like the premise of the flush. And of course, you support the liver and the kidneys, with things like NAC, calcium D-glucarate, D-limonene, stuff like that, which will help the liver start to detoxify and break down cholesterol and estrogen.
Gotcha. So again, I hear this and it's like, you could have your calories and macros, but food choice is obviously going to play a big role in that too. Just from a standpoint of like, if certain foods if certain foods are higher inflammatory, like that could be causing an issue. Like you might have to look at your food choice here on this as well too. Is there anything else inflammation wise that maybe we left out or you think is important for the audience to know?
I think we've covered most of it. I mean, supplement wise, curcumin, fish oil, a Mediterranean style diet, if you don't want to do a flush protocol, would be helpful. But it's mainly just, removing processed foods, removing alcohol, resting, and then addressing your lifestyle stressors. That's it.
Yeah, I think the fish oil is a big one. That the more I learn, the more I realize I think fish oil is a very very good supplement to take for most people, especially if you don't get fish on a regular basis, especially with just today's the western lifestyle basically is geared towards high inflammatory just everything. So it's good to get some of those anti-inflammatory nutrients in there like fish oil. So we'll dive into gut health a little bit because I know that's tied into inflammation, but insulin sensitivity, I know that's one that you kind of mentioned too earlier, or insulin resistance. But
you want to talk about insulin resistance now, you mean?
Yeah, just as I know that was one that you said. Again, this is one of those things that could be going on in weight loss resistance. So yeah.
So insulin resistance, simply put, is just that your body is either not producing enough insulin, or the cells in your body are not listening to the insulin that your body is actually producing. So think of it, if you're a parent, think of it like a child that isn't listening to what you tell him or her to do. They are being resistant to your parenting. So insulin's job, obviously released by the pancreas in response to blood glucose levels. It's to shuttle this glucose into your muscle, your liver, and if there's any overflow, into your fat cells via what's called de novo lipogenesis, the new creation of lipids. So when you're resistant, you're going to have a lot of blood glucose floating around, which can inflame your vessels and your arteries and lead to things like diabetic neuropathy, which is awful. Like people can lose their limbs, have a distended hard shell belly when they advance in type 2 diabetes. But it's basically your body just not listening to what insulin's supposed to do.
What are some things that you can kind of do to alleviate that? Like, what are some kind of common, like, just practical applications there with that and improving insulin sensitivity?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is to be active. It's to place a demand on the glucose in your body. So glucose is energy, right? So that energy needs to be burned instead of stored. So make sure you're exercising. Make sure you're going for walks, doing your cardio. Of course, carbohydrate selection and carbohydrate amount. So don't overeat, pull back on carbs. You don't have to go keto, but maybe try a Mediterranean style diet, which is lower in carbs and higher in omega-3 fats and moderate in protein, right? A lot of fishes. There's supplements that can help. Of course, there's, your glucose disposal agents made by a variety of different companies out there. And of course, you can get into like, some of the medical, therapies for hypoglycemia as well.
Which I'm assuming probably one of the ones that we'll talk about here in a little bit is one of those potentially as well too. Yeah. Cool. So I think the big things there with that is like just be active, carb selection. So again, I hear this, and is this something that you commonly see in people that, again, maybe they don't have like a ton of weight to lose, but they just, again, their body's just sticking there that, they're
not. I mean, insulin resistance isn't like a fat person's disease. You can be skinny and look great and still have insulin resistance because you're stressed out, or maybe you have lean PCOS, or you have some other genetic propensity to develop insulin resistance. So it's not just, it's not correlated to body fat. You can't just say, oh, that person's fat, so that they must be insulin resistant. That's not true.
How big of a role does muscle play in this as well too?
I would say it plays a fairly large role because muscle is metabolically active. And so the more muscle you have, the more glucose it takes to uphold it and to fuel it. So your chances of developing type 2 diabetes when you're very muscular and carry a lot of lean mass are probably very low.
Yeah. I just have heard that, muscle is really important there for insulin sensitivity. But obviously, again, that's just part of the equation. It's not the only thing. We have to look at everything else as well, too. And again, you keep going back to inflammation as being a big thing here that can, again, affect insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance.
Correct.
Cool. Again, on that, is there anything else? We'll kind of talk about some, like you said, some medical stuff that you can potentially do there to help with it. But is there anything else there with it that maybe we missed or that you think is important for the audience to know about insulin sensitivity when it comes to weight loss resistance?
Yeah, a good way that I like to get insulin sensitivity back is to use a carb cycle. So, I won't use like no carbs, but I'll cut carbs pretty low. So something like maybe 60 grams one day, and I'll go up to maybe 80 grams the next day, and then 100 grams the next day. So I'll have like a little ladder. Think of it like a little step ladder, a low, a medium, and a high step. And protein will be pretty low. So we're talking about 150-pound average woman. Protein will probably be 100. And I jack the fats up to maybe 70, 75. A lot of fishes, omegas, and all that. And the carbs are all fruits. And so, excuse me. So what I'll do is increase those carbs over time. So that lower step might become an 80, and then that middle step becomes 100, and the high step becomes a 120. And I just keep going up like that. And if I hit a wall, I go back to the lower step. I go back to 60, and then I work up again. So I'm working within a range. When I'm feeding up, I have a range to feed up in. I'm not just continuously going up. I know that I'm going to stay here, but I'm just going back and forth, like an accordion kind of. And that's how I get my results. And once I do, then I start going up.
Gotcha. Is there anything specifically to look out for here? Like, how would you pay attention? Like, how would you know this is going on? I guess other than like, I'm sure labs are going to be helpful here with this, but is there anything else that is going to give you this like indication of, hey, this is what is going on?
I mean, I wouldn't be running labs during this because you can monitor insulin sensitivity improvements through fasted blood glucose. You can see it in HRV. You can see it in blood pressure as well. Other than that, visual aids, looking at their photos, looking at their weight, having them take MSQs, questionnaires about symptoms. you can do a lot without asking the client to shell out another $300 for lab work.
Yeah. Cool. And then, so I think another one you kind of mentioned was gut health too. That's going to be another one there that could be off. So I don't know if there's anything specific that you wanted to touch on that. I know, again, this is a very, obviously to let the listener know, this is a very complex topic. I feel like we could probably spend 2 to 3 episodes talking about what all the things that are going on there, but I didn't know if there was anything specific that, you may notice pretty regularly here with this.
Yeah, I would say if you're bloated, constipated, have diarrhea, distended belly, even upon waking, and you didn't eat or drink anything, you likely have some sort of bacterial overgrowth, and you need to fix that first before you can feed up. So that's where, systems and strategies within systems and strategies that are within systems and strategies come into play. And you need to really understand every system of the body and how one thing ties to another and feeds downward and flows upward in order to know where to attack it. But I would say if you got gut issues, fix the gut issues first.
Yeah, because that's kind of, again, if that's off, that's going to lead into this inflammation. And then that inflammation is going to show up as potentially like insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, stuff like that. So it's going to just kind of have this trickle down effect to everything else.
Yeah. Another analogy for maybe the guys out there, it's like you're working on a car and you got a potato in your tailpipe and you're trying to fix the engine. Remove the potato first and then tinker with the engine and change the oil maybe, and then you'll have a better exhaust system.
What are no, I love it. I think analogies are great, and I'm just not very good at them, and I need to figure out how to make some work. So I always love a good analogy. So I guess here, what are some things that you I know you kind of talked about a few things that you could potentially do, but is there, I guess, any kind of like low hanging fruits here with this that you, or is it always come down to, hey, you might need to do some sort of like elimination diet or something like that?
No, just stop drinking alcohol, stop binge and eat foods that are closest to their form of nature. Eat more fruits and vegetables, get more fiber in, drink water intake. I had a client recently, she's a nurse actually. I don't think she'll listen to this podcast, but it's not like I'm making fun of her anyway. We're working on a gut protocol. She has Hashimoto's, and we're working. Her blood glucose wasn't coming down. It was like up to like 100 or something. And I was just like, what's your water intake like? She's like, oh, it's really hard to get water in because I'm in the ICU and all this stuff. I'm like, listen, I want you to drink 2 gallons of water every day for the next 2 weeks. I want you to report your fasted blood glucose to me. Comes down to an 89. It's just water. And then we actually just got labs back for her TPOAB. It dropped like another 60 points. So things are going the right way.
Yeah, that's all. I mean, just some small thing like that. I know, yeah, I'm sure sleep too, probably, right? That's probably one. And again, that's going to probably tie into every single one of these as well too. I'm sure sleep's going to negatively impact. Poor sleep is going to negatively impact every single one of these things as well too.
Yeah, poor sleep. One night of poor sleep negatively impacts leptin and ghrelin signaling, impacts insulin resistance. You can actually see it go up the next day. Dysregulates bowel movements, everything. Like if you ever get up like really early to catch a flight, you can't shit. Because your bowel movements are tied to your circadian patterns. Yeah.
And on top of it too, I typically find that I'll increase my coffee intake on that day, so you end up getting that kind of wired and tired feeling as well too when you're doing when you're traveling. Exactly. Yeah, sleep, and then again, I think again this ties into everything that we talked about. Like obviously stress is going to play a role, but then too, just even like potentially in certain situations for people that again fall on that spectrum of like doing a lot of training, low calorie type, like they're going to be ones that just overtraining and stuff like that can be a thing that can potentially affect like your gut health as well too, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's more stress, more physiological stress.
Yeah. Was there, so again, gut health, I mean, like I said, that's one that, we could probably you could spend a ton of time here on this and how that's going to affect everything. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to these? Like I know, again, we had perceived stress, inflammation, insulin sensitivity, gut health. I didn't remember if there was anything else that you mentioned there at the beginning that you sometimes see here.
I think we covered pretty much the main ones. It's just really the understanding of how they all intertwine. That's where people get hung up on. But individually, they're fairly simple concepts. It's just knowing like how and when they tie in that people get tripped up on, I think.
then again, that's why I always say, like, as I've learned more, I think that obviously calorie macros are important to help you there, but I think that's where, again, people get too caught up in that specific thing, in terms of like
Yeah.
what's going on. And that's why, like, well, I'm tracking 1,200 calories, but I'm not seeing things go down. And it's like something along these lines is probably off here. And then obviously we also know that, probably not tracking super accurately either. And that's like, not that people are doing that on purpose, but it's just, we know that and research has shown that can be off by a good amount as well too in these scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, consistency is required for progress, right? So even when you are being consistent, it's sometimes progress is going to be slow. So imagine when you're inconsistent, how are you going to expect to, lose 30 pounds in like 8 weeks, right? It ain't going to happen. So
Right. So in these scenarios too, do you just try to work on these things in combination with like continuing to potentially be in a like calorie deficit to elicit weight loss? Or is there scenarios where you might take like a diet break, or maybe, yeah, I'm just curious to hear kind of what you do in some of these situations. I know, again, it's going to be very dependent on the exact situation, right? Like, again, somebody that's overweight is going to be different than what you would tell somebody that's not overweight and trains a ton, et cetera.
I mean, diet breaks and refeeds and free meals and all that is largely dependent on the individual and their desired timeline and also their biofeedback. If I feel like things aren't going the right way and I'm in a deficit, I'm not going to continue going further in a deficit. I'm going to pull things back because logically that just makes sense, right? But that all depends on adherence. It depends on, if the client hasn't been adhering to a deficit, they're pretty much been taking refeeds and cheat meals. So why would I diet break somebody who diet breaks themselves every 2 to 3 days, right? So it depends on the client.
Yeah. I figured that was going to be the answer there on that. That typically what it is really depends on the client and in their specific situation. Is there any other like maybe practical takeaways here or applications that somebody could take from this if they are in this position where, again, they're tracking, just things aren't moving down?
Track their hormonal symptoms too. Track symptoms, track what's going on in your life. You may have just had like a bad week, a bad month, shit's been going on. Tie your perception of your health to what's going on with your lifestyle, and you'll see clearer correlations and be able to make better decisions.
I think that's, again, where having a coach is just super helpful to point these things out to you, because it's so easy to overlook these when you're just doing it on yourself. And then also, again, this is the thing that I feel like, and you can probably attest to this as well too. A lot of people that stress response too is when they don't see weight trending down like they want it to, that's a stress response for a lot of these situations as well too, which doesn't help. So and then I think to kind of transition into our next topic here, you kind of mentioned some like potential like medical grade type solutions here to this, if you're one of these people that might be running into this issue where it's just like you're tracking, just things aren't going down, you have some insulin resistance going on, etc. And hopefully, I told you off air, I'm gonna try not to butcher the name of it, but I think I got it after talking to you. So semaglutide is one that is fairly new, and so I'm just curious to talk about that a little bit, because I've been hearing a lot more about it. I know you had a class. I think did you have a class on it, or did you just make a post on it?
No, I made a post on it, and then John Jewett and Luke Miller had me on their podcast to talk about semaglutide. But yeah, the drug itself is new, but the class of drugs it belongs to has actually been around for several years now. They're a class of drugs called incretin mimetics. So they mimic incretin hormones, which basically act to increase insulin production, beta cell activity. So that's basically what they are.
What it is, yeah. What's kind of the research behind it? Is it fairly does it have pretty good backing on it? Yeah, just curious to hear about that. I know you said that type of drug has been around for a while, but this specific one is fairly new.
Yeah, well, a lot of these drugs are formulated differently, so they have like slightly different side effects. Semaglutide definitely carries a lot of GI side effects, especially when it's ingested orally. But a lot of those side effects can be mitigated through, careful titration of the drug. It can also be injected subcutaneously as well. But it seems like, most people who are in the need to use semaglutide probably aren't the people who are going to be injecting themselves as well.
So I know you didn't really mention this yet, but I know it works with GLP-1. And
Yeah.
so maybe if you want to hit on the importance of that and why that is important in this
Yeah.
process.
So it's a GLP-1 RA, so glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist. And so it basically does what GLP-1 would normally do. A receptor agonist is basically like going back to the hormone analogy and the lock and the key. It's like a fake key or a copy of a key that does the same thing to the lock that the hormone would usually do. Because in a lot of cases of insulin resistance, these patients or clients, they have downregulation of GLP-1 and also GIP, which is another incretin. So I explained this on John's podcast too, but they're basically released in your small intestine in response to glucose. And so they're released by two different types of cells. There's K cells and there's L cells. All right. K cells are more close, proximal to your mouth. And then the L cells are distal, they're further away from your mouth. So if you think about the way carbohydrates are ingested and broken down, right? Simple carbohydrates would probably interact more with your K cells than your L cells, right? Because the fiber slows down digestion like a bowl of oatmeal, right? So the K cells release GIP, which isn't good. It actually will start to shift the scales over towards that metabolic disease compensation mode, weight loss resistance, versus more interaction with the L cells is preferable for mediating insulin release in the right way. So there's a lot of debate in the nutritional and medical communities as to, are foods really bad? Like, is eating a box of Frosted Flakes, are the Frosted Flakes themselves bad, or is it what it does to our body bad? And I lean towards the camp that it's not the substance or the items themselves, it's the effect that they induce or elicit within our ecosystem, our hormonal ecosystems. Yeah.
So GLP-1, that's going to play a role in like satiety and stuff, correct?
Yeah. So GLP-1 receptors and GIP receptors are littered throughout the entire body and in the brain too. So that's why these incretin mimetics, semaglutide has been shown to lower hunger, reduce cravings, reduce the speed of motility and gastric emptying, so that these people can follow diets better and follow calorie restriction better, which then causes them to lose weight. Now, the problem with that is a lot of doctors and researchers don't know the long-term side effects of GLP-1 RAs in terms of how they interact with neurotransmitters and serotonin and dopamine and leptin and ghrelin and all that stuff. And so a lot of people have been experiencing weight loss or weight regain, rebound from weight loss post semaglutide. And we don't know like the long-term effect. Nobody does. So
And so I think this is important because again, this goes back to like you take somebody who is struggling they're at this like weight loss resistance standpoint, and again we talked about like all these things that could be going on there in terms of why that may be, but then you bring in something like GLP-1, and like my understanding is that this is in these situations where there's like insulin resistance and again inflammation and stuff like that, and just this can be out of whack, and it's like that how it normally works is just out of whack. And so that's why, like, for some people, like you kind of mentioned this earlier, that's why it's tougher when there's you give somebody a calorie deficit or a calorie number. For one person that does it, it's like, hey, this is super simple, I don't have to really do anything, and I just lose weight. Whereas somebody else that does it, it's like there's so much extra stuff that goes on that we don't realize, and that's why it's tougher to stick to that.
I think with drugs, like when you go back to the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, like do no harm, and their job, the fitness industry always gripes about how their job is to keep you alive, where coaches' jobs are to optimize health and performance. Well, that's why drugs like semaglutide exist. It is to do no harm and to alleviate severe symptoms of insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes immediately, so that the patient or client is no longer suffering, right? And so the doctors, yes, they're throwing a medication on it and they're not addressing the root causes. Yes, I agree with that. And yes, I agree that's wrong. But in the context of that application, I do think in some cases that's the right thing to do to prevent diabetic neuropathy and heart attacks and things like that, right? So when people aren't in severe and urgent need of medical intervention and they're obtaining semaglutide through a clinic or through a coach, God forbid, and applying it to, you know, post-show rebounds or contest prepping or whatever, that's a whole different animal, you know? And in many cases, I don't think that should be happening.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about, you know, how to get it, and like who it's far more than, you know, who would benefit from it, and like who you think should use it. But on this too, so I guess, so what causes this kind of dysregulation in GLP-1? Is it the insulin resistance, or is it just like lifestyle and like genetics, or is there anything there with that?
A lot of it's lifestyle and genetics. You can have cell die off over time, and that can cause, you know, the incretins to diminish their effect on the beta cells in the pancreas. Yeah, not a lot is known as to, you know, how these hormones function really.
Yeah. But no, I agree with you. I think somebody would hear this and be like, oh, you can't just throw medication on it. But it's like, I mean, again, if these people are struggling with this and whatnot, it's like, this is going to make that easier for them to actually stick to that calorie deficit potentially.
And then they can potentially then address the root causes and apply the habit training and building and coaching and all that, and they can be successful. And then you remove the crutches, and hopefully those crutches don't have lasting side effects in this case.
Yeah, well, like you said, the downsides right now is, it seems like, from my understanding from what you said, is it seems like the long term, like once somebody comes off of this medication, it doesn't seem like they have to build the habits on top of it for it to be able to last. Like once you come off of it, it's like if you go back to what you're doing before, things are just going to go back to how they were before. And then we also don't know the like long term side effects of it as well, which is a risk, obviously, that you are taking with this.
Correct.
So who would it be, like who would use it? Are there any application? I know you kind of mentioned like post competition. Like, would this be something that I think you said also, like it could be used in like lean or like PCOS, but it's also not like, that's not how it's like, you can't diagnose it with that. Or I think I saw that on your post as well too. So I guess,
yeah, it's not approved for use in PCOS. As of this year, it's not approved for use in PCOS, although it certainly can be applied and has been researched within the context of PCOS. But mainly it's just for people who are obese, people who have insulin resistance, type 2 diabetics. And then, of course, bodybuilders want to get the edge and not feel hungry, right, post-show or during contest prep. Just like bodybuilders use Adderall, they use nicotine to suppress contest prep hunger. But yeah, those are the people who are going to be using it. Celebrities, you know, Kim Kardashian used it. That's the reason why semaglutide in particular of the incretin mimetics are popular. The rest of them, I think there's 7 other ones. They didn't gain the popularity that Kim produced, you know, by saying that she used semaglutide.
so obviously, it's designed to be for people who are overweight, like you said, type 2 diabetes, insulin resistant. That's going to be the most, but obviously other people can get their.
And anybody can benefit from semaglutide. The question is, do you need to, you know?
Because I would imagine too that probably there's some dysregulation there with it. Like once you're like in a calorie deficit, and like you said, you're getting leaner, even if you are, like that's going to pop up. And so like you could use it in that situation, but it's like, do you need to use it, and should you use it in that situation?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. Like if someone has an eating disorder and they're already not eating and they take semaglutide because they want to get leaner.
Yeah.
And shutting off hunger signaling and allowing the eating disorder to proliferate and grow, that's not a good thing. You don't want something like that taking this. So
yeah.
No.
So I know you kind of hit on this too. And I do want to go back to like, you know, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, and you're going to need a prescription for it, but I want to save that for just a little bit here. So I know you kind of hit on the side effects there, but what are some of the kind of most common side effects? When you said GI distress is one of them, and whatnot there with it.
Yeah, so you know, you're going to have slower motility. So if you have gut issues, if you didn't address those first in the order of operations, so to speak, you're going to make that worse. It's largely like a rebound effect. When you get off of it, that's when you see the side effects of hunger dysregulation, appetite dysregulation. However, there has been studies that show that a lot of the improvements in sensitivity will remain after the drug has been stopped. So there seems to be some long-term positives, although the long-term negatives are unknown, so you can't really weigh the two just yet.
Yeah. And then I think one thing I saw too, like nausea, is that something that potentially could be a part of it?
General stomach discomfort, nausea, maybe some constipation, diarrhea in some people, just basically like general just GI issues.
But I think you kind of hit on this earlier, that can be all solved by just like titrating the dosage and making sure you're not like obviously the more is probably, if you just start off just with anything you do too much at first, it's like you're going to see all these potential side effects.
I mean, they're starting the doses off at like 1 milligram, but you can obviously start much lower and work your way up.
How I think you kind of hit on this. How do most people take this? You said it's like, and I did listen to your podcast episode with John Jewett, and I think you kind of mentioned that like the people that are going to be taking this aren't like your bodybuilders, or the people that it's prescribed to, or they're more likely going to want to do like the oral medication rather than like
it's going to be
being injected.
It's a pill.
How long do people typically take it for?
I have no idea. You could take it for as long as you need to, I guess.
Okay. So there's no time frame on it or anything like that in terms of.
I'm not sure on that. I don't want to say that.
And then is it something that's like a daily type situation that you take it daily, or is it like once every like 30 days, or do you not know?
I'm pretty sure the oral one is daily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And then lastly on this topic, just so people like, obviously you have to get a doctor's prescription on this, correct? Like this is something that.
Yeah, this is a prescription medication.
And so like people like Kim Kardashian, I'm just curious, how would somebody like that, like they just, I guess, know the right doctors, I guess, at that point?
How does The Rock get his steroids? Yeah. I mean, he's got the good stuff. He's got the stuff that we want, but no, we can't get it. So
right. Is there anything else that maybe we didn't go over on this topic or anything like that? And again, I think it's important that people know we're not doctors or anything here on this. We're just talking about a potential option for people here on this. So
that's important for people to know that we're not doctors. I have to tell people that all the time, that I'm not a doctor.
That's in your Instagram bio, isn't it?
That's in my Instagram bio. Yes. I want people to pay more attention to what I said about the systems and understanding the connectivity of that than going straight to, obviously I think you'll probably mention semaglutide in your write-up on this or whatever, if you choose to, but I don't want people to be drawn towards this or drawn towards any flush protocols. And that's the easy stuff. Okay. If you're listening to this and you're drawn to this stuff, change how you think, because that shows me that your mind is drawn to the easy stuff that you're just going to take from this podcast or another podcast and throw on a client and see if it works. And that's not proper coaching. Proper coaching is understanding the knowledge deep enough to make the connections yourself, arrive at your own conclusions, and then use those on clients. So I want to make that clear.
No, I'm glad you brought that up, because like you said, there's things that we talked about in here that, like you said, if your first thing is like, oh, I need to try that, it's like, okay, you're, like you said, you're trying to take the easy route and you're going to end up being in the same cycle with everything. You're not like, again, I feel like you're probably not working on that root cause. And I'm assuming some of those things that you're specifically talking about are, again, like in that situation for, let's take the person that's like leaner on the leaner side, they train a ton and they're weight loss resistant. For them, it's like, oh, hey, what supplement do I need to take to break through this? But it's like, look at your lifestyle, right? Like, are you sleeping good? Do you probably have to pull back on your training a little bit, type of situation. That's the hard stuff that like sucks, but is necessary for you to kind of break through that plateau.
The simple little necessary stuff is the hard stuff, because at the core of disease, it's habits. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's just habits. It's how you think. It's what you do on a daily basis that adds up over time. And then all of a sudden you have something, or it's genetics, which can impact it as well, right? Some people, unfortunately, they smoke one cigarette and they get cancer. Other people, they smoke all their lives and they're on their deathbed at like 102 and they live a great life, right? So it's luck of the draw in some cases, but most of the time it's habits. And that's really what coaching is. You are coaching human beings. You are not coaching lab work. You are not coaching a machine that can just execute every week perfectly. You are dealing with humans that have a lot of factors that may affect their adherence. So be a human to another human, and you'll be a successful coach.
Cool. I love that. Jeff, appreciate your time, man. Do you have anywhere where you want to kind of lead the audience to find out more about you and whatnot?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram mainly. I'm on Facebook too, but I don't post on there that often. So you'll find me at First Call Fitness. I have a website, firstcallfitness.com. I have classes that are always on sale. You probably won't be posting this that quickly, but I do have a Black Friday sale that ends this Friday at 5 p.m., day after Thanksgiving. But other than that, the classes are always on sale. They're just on my Instagram bio. Just DM me.
And the PEC in January as well too. Which I'm not sure. Did you mention earlier what you were chatting about specifically? I think it's PCOS and
yeah, it's the pathophysiology of PCOS and insulin resistance. So I will be talking a little bit about what we talked about today, especially the incretin mimetics, the sulfonylureas, and things like metformin, but within the context of PCOS only.
Got you. Awesome. Well, Jeff, appreciate your time, man, and we'll get you on here again for a third time at some point.
Sounds good. Third date.
All
right.
See you, man.